How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to season number 3 of our Washington Commanders rebuild, kind of in a shared universe if we do end up moving. So it's going to be year 3 of 4 that we're entering, like I said at the first episode, where we said this is going to be given 4 years just to kind of see what we've done, ultimately taking a look back on it and deciding whether we stay or whether we go. But just taking a look at a little bit of the recap from last season. Obviously, the Dallas Cowboys and the Kansas City Chiefs have a rematch of the season before, but this time it is the Dallas Cowboys coming away with it, with Dak Prescott both getting the Super Bowl MVP and the NFL MVP, pardon me as I'm hiccuping. Romeo Gallo is the Coach of the Year for the Jets. CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons take the Offensive and Defensive Player of the Year, both on the Cowboys. Brian Gaines and Tyree Newhouse both take the Rookies of the Year. But that is where that is. So we are going to take a look, and obviously for us, we went back-to-back years in the playoffs. So as I was talking about that potential contract extension for us moving forward, 2 years in back-to-back playoffs, and we actually got a playoff win, I'd say it's pretty much looking more likely that we're going to be staying as opposed to be moving on, but moving forward. So as we do at the start of these videos, just to get a quick refresher of some of the top players in the draft class, just going to look at this quick little mock draft, and this is also going to give us an opportunity to see what our pick is actually going to be. Alex Brady, a top 5 player, all the way down at pick number 18 to the Seahawks, just something that caught my eye. But Ernest Farley, who's a day 3 projection running back, is the guy that they say we're picking, and we are pick number 26. So clearly us having a very stout year. So yeah, we're just gonna get over into the next part of where we're taking a look at some of the players that we need to re-sign. So obviously for us, when we walked into the last episode, I think we ended up re-signing 5 of our players and just getting a ton of guys. But Emmanuel Forbes Jr. is looking for the 5th-year option. We are 100% accepting that. A young player, 25 years old, 82 overall, and is a superstar. His career has only been good with us at the helm, so we're not going to be upset with that at all. Paris Campbell, when we first got him, he was going to kind of be our de facto number 3 wide receiver. Then we got Luke Hunt, and pretty much he just hasn't been able to touch the field. And then just kind of taking a look at a bunch of other players. James Houston the second, that 27 overall. I know we brought him in and he had the tag of future starter, but I just don't think he's gonna be good enough moving forward. And unfortunately, since we lost Khalil Mack, we are gonna have to look. Jonah Williams, unfortunately, just not gonna be really utilized for us, mainly because we used him as a guard in that first year, and he was a tackle or a backup tackle in the second year. So I'm just going to allow him to walk, and then just continuing to look through some of the guys here. Andrew Wiley, again, he was our backup throughout the year. Connor McGruven, who has been our center the last 2 seasons. Last year, we let him test the free agency market, and unfortunately for him, we're also allowing him to test the free agency market again to see if we can get some improvement there. So all of these guys are ultimately going to be hitting the open market, while we have $58 million in cap space for this offseason. So the first little bit of free agency, I'm only going after 2 guys in the class so far, and that is center Connor Williams. Tyler Lindenbaum is also available in this free agency class, but 17 teams are going after him, and as you can see, Connor Williams has no one going after him. And you know what? 84 overall, 29 years old. He's going to be a center for us for, well, hopefully the next 3 years, which is what I ultimately signed him to. And then hopefully kind of being that Khalil Mack replacement. DeMarcus Lawrence also has that mentor tag for what we had with Khalil Mack. I don't expect the same level of production that he gave us that Mack did, but currently right now we don't really have anyone opposite of Moody, so I guess we're just gonna kind of have to put band-aids on a bunch of these guys here at the moment. Ended up getting both of these guys, nothing that really ultimately moved the needle, but just taking a look here at some of the top 100 guys. Zach Martin went with the Bucks, Tyler Lindenbaum went with the Titans. I remember they got Tua the year prior to, and just absolutely going crazy there. Ronnie Stanley, he is with the Titans as well, just going massive into the O-line. Teron Johnson also went with the Titans. They are just spending money, just absolutely crazy there. Devin Lloyd with the Titans. Who else did the Titans get? Sam Howell, who, funny enough, eliminated us from the playoffs last year, signs a 5-year deal. Oh my goodness. So the Rams are looking at him as, I guess, their franchise quarterback, which is going to be absolutely crazy to look at. But those are all some of the top guys. And to be perfectly honest, right here at the moment, I don't really know if I'm going to ultimately end up signing anyone else. We will see, though. So we have just officially made a trade with the Las Vegas Raiders, not for the first time in this series, but we send a 2027 second round pick for defensive end Tyree Wilson. If we remember, the Raiders ultimately have Max Crosby, and they drafted a edge rusher. I think it was second overall last year as well, if I'm remembering correctly. But Tyree Wilson with the Raiders, 77 overall, has that star depth trait. But the big thing that I saw, he had 11 sacks on the year last year. But let's take a little bit of a deeper look at him. So taking a look here at Tyree Wilson, again, that 6'6", 271, he has that 77 power rush, was just an absolute monster coming out of the draft last year in real life. But in the sim, started out with 3.5 sacks, then he got to 5, and then he had 11 in that, and so he also had 13 tackles for loss, 1 deflection, and then just taking a look at everything else, he also had 1 block kick during that time, and a fumble, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. The best part about him is that I personally, I think he ultimately still has that, or they didn't pick up his 5th-year option, so we are going to have to sign him at the end of the year, which I'm more than happy to do if I'm sending a second round pick for him. But a guy who got 11 sacks the year prior to, pairing him up with Moody, is ultimately going to be a fairly good thing. And if we can sign him relatively cheaply, which I think we probably should be able to, we can have him and Moody for a decent chunk of time, which ultimately we needed another young edge rusher alongside Moody, and this could potentially be our answer. So, with the first pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select Nathan Griffin, the defensive end out of Notre Dame, likely getting their pass rusher of the future. And with the second pick, the Saints go with John Harris, edge rusher out of Penn State. So that Big Ten Conference doing a ton of excellent work at developing some pass rushers, but we will get to our next pick. So with our first pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, we decided to go with left guard Darius LeBlanc. Ultimately, this is going to be one of those guys that I see is going to be our starter moving into the future once Wyatt decides to hang up the gloves, or we just decide to potentially not bring him back. This is 100% a future move looking down that particular route. And again, around that time, there was 1 or 2 players that I felt might have been something, but ultimately I just decided to go with LeBlanc. So with our second round pick, I end up going with free safety Randy Benford, who also has this hidden dev trade ability. Again, we've been kind of looking at Forrest as our main free safety, but it's likely going to be not us re-signing him in the near future, but I felt like Randy Benford was just too good to pass up, and ultimately we are rewarded with that hidden dev trait, and we are going to get our free safety of the future. But this is going to be the last pick that I actually show you right here, and we will take a look at the rest of the players at the end of the draft. Alright, so now taking an official look at our draft and how it worked out. So our first 3 picks, not too shabby. The 73, the 72, and then the 73 tight end in Nate Silverman. Going to be a good backup to Okonkwo. And then Logan Dempsey, this was a guy that I just looked at, took a flyer on. And then Edison also just took a flyer on. But John Moko, also was a little bit of a flyer, turned out to be not too bad, maybe a edge rusher of the future. But Dwayne Mooney, this was not a pick that I ultimately decided to make. The game glitched out on me and it said that my team had already made the pick, and then it auto selected him. So he was a 67 overall, so I guess it kind of worked out. I didn't think we really needed a wide receiver. He's probably not going to really see the field. Did he have a hidden depth trait? Did not. Um, I didn't actually see if Moko had a hidden dev trait. He does not, so he's just a normal. But LeBlanc, we already saw. Benford, we saw. And then I think Silverman's just a normal. He is just normal, but he has that possession and vertical threat, so he's going to be good either way. And then I'm pretty sure no one else in this class. I know these two guys didn't, but taking a look at the actual draft class itself, I'm gonna be fair, and I don't think this was one of the best draft classes that we've seen. 79, Matty Russell, and then Elton Hands Hazelton, yeah, no, there we go. Words are easy. A 79 overall fullback. That's a shock. In the 6th round, and the Chiefs just get one of the steals of the draft with a guy that's probably not going to make that much of a difference on the team. Interesting. But taking a look here at the rest of the round, again, the guy Jalen Rankin taken just before us. Just kind of looking through this 4th round pick. Ernest Farley, this was a guy that I was actually taking a look at, and I was going to take him in the 5th round if he was still there, but unfortunately he was not. Turns out he actually, I think he's the 2nd best player in this draft, and he is behind Matty Russell. So ultimately, not a terrible draft class by us by any means. Getting a handful of depth players. Unfortunately, we also got some guys that probably won't do anything. Mainly these three, our 4th, 5th, and 7th round weren't really anything, but our 6th and our first 3 rounds are all money. So right at the end of the preseason, we're ultimately going to trade away Martins, who is our backup strong safety, to the Tennessee Titans for a 2027 7th round pick and a 2028 6th rounder. Right now it was just one of those things. He just really wasn't seeing the field, and he had some value, and ultimately we decided to send him somewhere where he's probably going to get more playing time. So just taking a look here at the early stages of the draft class, it looks like we probably got a couple of edge rushers, a couple of tackles, a quarterback. Looks like it's going to be pretty heavy on the offensive line and defensive line, or particularly edge rusher, which I am not going to say no to whatsoever. But yeah, we'll take a look more at the regular season now. So, taking a look at our official roster heading into the season, Klein again, he is that superstar, 86 overall. Robinson again, still great. Terry McLaurin and Hunt actually became a superstar, so I think I might actually move him up to our 2nd, while Jahan Dotson is our 3rd, just because he also was our leading receiver last year. And Okonkwo, he again is that superstar. He was that last season, so this is what our offense is looking like. And then we have LeBlanc playing behind Cosme, and I'm not gonna lie, I totally forgot that we drafted Northrup, that he was our backup all of last year. So it looks like we have 2 good guards kind of waiting in the wing, and potentially, you know, both of these guys could eventually be replacements for the guys that we currently have on our roster. So, you know, not bad planning, but I mean, kind of silly move by me taking LeBlanc, forgetting that we already had a guy waiting in the wing in Northrup, who, if I'm remembering correctly, was like a 5th round pick or something like that. But let's just take a quick look here. And he was a 3rd round pick, so not quite 5th, but you know, still a fairly talented guy nonetheless. Taking a look here at our defensive side of the thing, Moody is going to be with Lawrence. And to be perfectly honest with you guys, I'm going to be switching these guys up and down. I want to give Wilson a bunch of playing time, obviously, since he had those 11 sacks, but I do want to give DeMarcus Lawrence. I'm probably going to switch who the starter is maybe each week just to kind of get a sense. But Emerson Jr., he is a superstar X Factor, obviously having himself a great year, and Forbes is a superstar, and Griffin is our third. And just overall, we did find out what Ben Ford was, and he is a star, so a good backup waiting in the wings. And yeah, so just continuing to look through, I think Phelps ultimately lost his dev trade. I think he was a star last year. I could be wrong if I'm misremembering. I apologize, but yeah, our kicking situation not really changing anything there. And then our specialist, again, Griffin is going to be that guy. Hunt is going to be our slot wide receiver, so it's not like Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson, there we go, finally able to spit that one out. Isn't going to get playing time, but Robinson is going to be our power back and third down back like it was last year. DeMarcus Lawrence and Wilson, again, are going to have the same situation of where they're just switching in and out, kind of just depending on how I feel they're doing each particular week. But now let's get into the regular season, and as per usual, we will sim to week 4 and kind of take a look at the stats, but whenever we get a win, we will also take a look there. So for the third season in a row, we start the season off with a win. We ended up beating the Philadelphia Eagles 21-14, outgaining them on the offensive side of the thing 318 to their 286. Taking a look here at the player stats, Lance Klein 271, 2 passing touchdowns to the 1 interception. Jalen Hurts not able to get it done, was sacked 4 times, so really good to see that our defensive line is ultimately getting after him. Brian Robinson kind of having a little bit of a weak day, only the 49 rushing yards, but he did get the 1 touchdown. He was able to break 4 tackles, which is nice. And looking at Will Blackman, he was able to break 2 tackles without a rush or any yards. I'm not really sure. Or it's because he caught some catches, but Luke Hunt leads the team, 7 catches, 126 yards, a touchdown, and Okonkwo also getting a receiving touchdown as well. Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin having themselves both pretty weak days, unfortunately, but overall still decent. Taking a look here at the sacks, no sacks given up by us. Curl, he leads the team in tackles. Taking a look at the sacks, Jermaine Davis, DeMarcus Lawrence, and Moody all getting the sacks on the day. Taking a look at no forced fumbles, pass deflections. So DeMarcus Lawrence having himself a good day, and Reggie Griffin also having a good one as well. So getting our second win of the season here in week 3, we ultimately win 20-13 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And now taking a look at some of the stats, Lance Klein for back-to-back games, not throwing a touchdown, also not throwing an interception, so that's good to see, but it's annoying that he should be getting these guys in the end zone. Last year, he was so efficient at finding the end zone, 199 yards, no sacks, which I guess is good. Brian Robinson, again, kind of having one of those mediocre games, but Will Blackman ultimately finding the end zone, and Steve Stanley finding it as well for our 2 rushing TDs. And again, just the receiving game not kind of going off as we would have expected. No sacks were given up. Taking a look, Reggie Griffin from the slot was able to find some. The 1 sack was Tyree Wilson, so it's good to see him get in there as well. And Kareem Curl getting the interception. So we are able to re-sign Tyree Wilson to a 4-year extension. Really, really cheap deal as well. Gotta say, I like the move. Hopefully we get to see some more production. He did have that 1 sack in his first game for us, so it's very good to see. But we have a lot of free agent decisions that are going to be need to make this offseason. So we are able to get our 3rd win of the year and our 2nd against the Philadelphia Eagles. This time they outgained us on the offensive side of things, but for us, didn't really matter too much as we ultimately got the win in this one, 23-19. Another close game, but taking a look at the stats, still Jalen Hurts not able to get any touchdowns against us, the 3 sacks, but Klein having the 2 touchdowns to 1 interception. So at least he's getting back in the touchdown column. We know that he's typically a slow starter to the season and typically likes to pick it up at the second half. But the 250 passing yards, the no sacks on the year so far. Again, Brian Robinson not really having an amazing year thus far. Only the 1 TD, and we've only seen the one game over 70 yards. Everything else has been less than 50, if I'm remembering correctly. So that's something to keep an eye on. Luke Hunt got the touchdown, and Okonkwo also getting the touchdown. Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson both not really getting it done much there. Looking at the blocking, no sacks given up. Curl again leading the team in tackles, tied with Davis, but still. Taking a look, Tyree Wilson, Isaiah Simmons, Moody, and Deron Payne all getting in there for collective sacks. No interceptions given up, so it's good to see Tyree Wilson get a couple of sacks so far in the year. For the first 2 games of the year, I left DeMarcus Lawrence there. He was able to get a pair of sacks, but ultimately, let's just take a look at the actual season so far. So like I said, the Eagles, we beat them twice, week 1 and in week 4, we beat the Jags, and I don't want to talk about what the Cowboys did to us in that particular game. They just seem to kind of have the edge over us ever since we beat them in week 18 of our first year with the team. But now taking a look at the team's stats so far. So, taking a look here at Lance Klein, again, throughout the first 4 weeks, definitely not what you would be hoping for with the type of numbers. He's putting up decent passing yards, only the 4 touchdowns. He's kind of on an average of 1 touchdown per game. And to be honest, those 2 games in the middle frame of this 4-game stretch, he had no touchdowns in either of them and no passing touchdowns. So it's either he gets no touchdowns and no interceptions or 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. Only been sacked the 1 time so far this year, which is amazing, but we definitely want to see that passer or that completion percentage go up. But like I said, he is a little bit of a slow starter. And Brian Robinson, 177 yards so far on the year. That just seems really, really low for him, what we've seen from him. The rushing touchdowns at 3, I'm more than happy with that. Blackman getting it and Stanley also getting there. But we might potentially need to look on from Brian Robinson if this kind of trend continues. Obviously, we gave him that contract extension last year, so this is the first year of it. He's not making a ton of money, but it's still one of those things we're definitely going to have to keep an eye on. Our receiving game, Luke Hunt is performing the best so far with Okonkwo. Again, still the numbers that you'd like to see a little bit higher. Terry McLaurin also doing good, but Jahan Dotson, I don't think he necessarily likes this role that we put him in as the wide receiver 3 moving forward. So it's going to be an interesting decision come trade deadline, because I know we are going to have to potentially look to re-sign him. A lot of interesting decisions are going to have to be made. But now taking a look at the defensive or the sacks, Chris Nix, our right tackle, the only player to actually give up a sack so far on the year, which I am more than okay with. Curl and Davis are tied on the team. Taking a look at tackles for loss, Leslie Moody leads it, and he also leads the team in sacks alongside DeMarcus Lawrence, and then Tyree Wilson also has 2 sacks, so he's 2 sacks per game essentially, so he's doing fairly well. DeMarcus Lawrence has better numbers, but he's just a little bit higher overall. But I think I'm going to continue to give Tyree Wilson a little bit more games and still kind of flip-flop these guys a bit. But still taking a look here, Deron Payne with only the half a sack, not crazy numbers, not crazy tackle for loss numbers either. Interceptions, Jermaine Davis and Kareem Curl. Taking a look at our kicking, Cameron Dicker, perfect on the extra points. He has had 1 field goal block, so that is the reason why we have the 2 for 4, but still not necessarily super happy with that, obviously, because, you know, he's one of those guys that is a really good kicker, so we want to see a little bit more, but we're going to see that number likely increase. So getting our third win in a row and our third win on teams inside our division. Funny to think about that we've played 4 out of the 5 games against divisional opponents here early stage, and we outgained the New York Giants. Taking a look at some of the stats, Lance Klein has the 278 passing yards, the 3 touchdowns and the 1 interception. He did get sacked once, and Christian Nielsen, the less than 200 passing yards, which I like, but he did get the touchdown, and he also got sacked 3 times, which I'm more than okay seeing. Brian Robinson finally having himself a little bit of a resurgence game. Maybe he finally heard that we might potentially look somewhere else with him. Gets those 86 yards off of those 17 rushes. Taking a look at the receiving game, Luke Hunt, 79 yards off of the 1 TD catch, 76 yards for Terry McLaurin, and then Okonkwo and Robinson both getting the 3 touchdown catches, and Jahan Dotson kind of sitting there, 3 catches, 34 yards, and just making it look more and more likely that we might have to move on from him come trade deadline day. Also taking a look here at the sacks, Connor Williams, our brand new center, gave up the sack there. A little bit unfortunate. Jermaine Davis and Reggie Griffin getting the team, or leading the team in sacks. Leslie Nielsen, DeMarcus Lawrence, and Tyree Wilson all getting a sack there. So the 3 guys that are our main pass rushers all doing that very thing. No interceptions on the day. So continuing on with our good form, we ended up beating the Carolina Panthers 35-24, outgaining them 391 yards, 291, getting those basically that 100-yard difference. Taking a look at the 2 teams, both quarterbacks having decent days, both throwing interceptions. One quarterback got sacked twice and one didn't. Lance Klein, again, a little bit more risque with the ball, but again, we always see with him that he has a little bit of a slow start, but really picks it up in the second half of the year. So I'm just hoping that's what it's going to be. Brian Robinson, not necessarily having the yards, but he's getting into the end zone twice, so that is very good to see. Then Luke Hunt, the 150 yards, 2 TDs. This guy has just been an absolute steal for us when we made that trade. Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson having a little bit of a game, but nothing too crazy or special to say the least, but ultimately some good receiving yards. No sacks were given up on this game, and tackled for losses. Taking a look here at the sacks, Deron Payne got 1, Isaiah Simmons and Moody both tied for 1 as well. And then the interception, Emmanuel Forbes got it. And if I'm remembering correctly, he also got the defensive touchdown as well. So getting that pick 6 is always very nice to see. So we were able to beat the San Francisco 49ers in week 7, continuing on with our good form, 19-17 in this one, outgaining them by a significant amount also, almost about 100 yards. But taking a look at the actual stats, Brock Purdy with the 2 TDs was sacked 3 times. Lance Klein, 233 passing yards and the 1 TD, but the no interceptions, and he was also sacked the once. So taking a look at Brian Robinson, finally making another end zone appearance with some good numbers. Will Blackman, the backup, also getting into the end zone there. Receiving game, Jahan Dotson, maybe kind of trying to show a little bit of trade value almost at this point in the season, saying, hey, I can still have some really good games. And Luke Hunt with the 61 and the 1 receiving touchdowns. Terry McLaurin kind of taking a little bit of a backseat here at the moment, and not really able to get that. I'm kind of curious about Terry McLaurin, how his season ultimately has looked just per game basis. And who gave sack? Chris Nix ultimately did. Jermaine Davis leads the team in tackles by a wide margin. And looking at the sacks, Deron Payne, Isaiah Simmons, Moody, and Meadows also getting a half a sack there, and no interceptions on the game. So right as we get to trade deadline day, ultimately we had a decision to make about Jahan Dotson. It was either going to be trade him or re-sign him, and ultimately for me it was going to be how much money was he going to be demanding come this time. And we got him on a 2-year deal, pretty cheap as well, for him to be our number 3 and not have to pay him an extraordinary amount, and for him to be an 81 overall and a star player. That is not bad value in my opinion. So now that we're at trade deadline day, I'm ultimately going to be sending DeMarcus Lawrence to the Houston Texans for their second round pick. If you remember at the beginning of the video, we ultimately traded away our second round pick in favor of getting Tyree Wilson, and who has been fairly good for us this year, ultimately getting a little bit cheaper on the cap space, but getting some draft capital back for a guy that ultimately we are just going to be moving on from at this point in the year. So we are officially at the halfway mark of the season. So just taking a look at our team right now. Again, we only have the 2 losses, so putting us at 6-2. So we just had a loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers in what was a pretty close game. I typically don't take a look at losses. Let's just see how we typically did. Just quickly go through anything sticking out. Nothing terribly. We did give up a sack, but take a look here. Isaiah Simmons and Leslie Moody doing that, but Griffin and McCoy also getting there. No interceptions, just kind of unfortunate. But that is where we stand at the halfway point of the season. But let's go take a look at the halfway mark for stats. Lance Klein, so far this year, he's actually in the top 6 for passing yards so far this year, almost at 2,000 halfway through the year. So he's getting the ball out fairly well. He's just not finding the back of the end zone as well as he would like. At this point last year, he had the 15 touchdowns. He also had those 10 interceptions. So he's drastically kind of dropped that here at the moment. So overall, not too bad. And only being sacked 3 times so far this year is definitely worth liking. And Brian Robinson definitely having a little bit better 4 games after we looked at it, and it was just kind of one of those things where like, man, it just seems really down. It still seems a little bit down from where it likely should be, 464, but he does have those 7 touchdowns, Blackman getting the 2, so we're not going to be too terribly upset there. And the receiving game, 600 yards essentially for Hunt with the 7 touchdowns. Terry McLaurin with 420, no touchdowns on the year. Okonkwo with the 4 touchdowns, 359. Jahan Dotson, no touchdowns on the year through the air. Brian Robinson actually has more as a passing back, I guess, but we typically don't play him as a passing back. Looking at the sacks, all 3. 2 have come from Chris Nix and 1 from Connor Williams. But now taking a look at our defensive side of thing, Curl and Davis both leading the team in tackles. Tackles for loss is Leslie Moody, who also leads the team in sacks with 5.5. Isaiah Simmons with 3.5. Tyree Wilson with 3. So he's definitely slowed down a little bit. Hopefully he can kind of get back to that almost, sack 11 sacks per season, like what we saw from when we traded for him. Deron Payne with 2.5, Davis with 1.5. Take a look at the interceptions. Davis, Curl, and Forbes all with the interceptions. Now looking at the kicking, Cameron Dicker has just not been good. He also had the he has an extra point blocked, so he would have remained perfect there, but he's only made the 2 kicks off of the 5. Granted, he has had the 1 field goal block, but he's still missed essentially half of the kicks that have gone past the line. So that's never good to see. It's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. So that is where today's episode is going to end. I know the first 2 episodes were definitely a little bit longer than I initially thought they were realistically going to be. The second episode was almost an hour long, so I'm likely going to be splitting each season up into 2 parts. Typically going to be doing the first half where we do the free agency and the draft, and then the second part is where we go after the trade deadline or after 8 games have been played, so either week 9 or week 10 depending on if we have an early bye, and then after that point we will be doing playoffs if we have any, and kind of making decisions on what's going to be happening there. But ultimately that is where we are going to leave this episode off here today, guys. Thank you all very much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment if you have any other ideas that you want to see me try to do moving forward.